I'm going to call to order the SHAPE Committee meeting for May 2nd, a little after 6:30. And if we could get a roll call, Cindy?
Chair Smithers.
Here.
Vice Chair Chateau.
Here.
Committee Member Barr.
Here.
Caldwell.
Here.
Dell.
Here.
Feeney.
Here.
Knight.
Here.
Neiman.
Here.
Park is absent. Salvestrin.
Here.
And Smith is absent.
Okay, so the first item on the agenda, number 3, would be the public comment pertaining to the SHAPE Committee for any items that aren't on tonight's agenda. Is there anybody that has any public comment they'd like to offer up? And I see no one's rushing to the mic, so I'll close.
Wait.
Oh, sorry.
God. Hi, I am Esther Ackersloot, and I just want to reiterate my compliments to the panel. You've done a fantastic job, and I'm sure that it's all going to work out well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Esther. Thank you, Esther.
Thank you. I'm glad I didn't cut off public comment too soon.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Okay, item number 4, 4.1 on the consent calendar is the March 28th SHAPE Committee minutes. Is there any discussion, or do I have a motion?
Motion to approve.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. So moved. Okay, so new business. First on the agenda is to review the last 2 properties and see if we can refine the alternatives that were created earlier. And I thought we would, although it's not the order that's here, I thought we'd kick it off with the Railroad Avenue properties and see if we can get through that. So, Jean, do you want to help us with that?
Let's start with the Railroad Avenue properties. Is that all right? And is it okay if we just take them together? Because it's one parcel, even though there's 2 buildings. So that's the CDF and the Teen Center. Okay. So we shortened the matrix. I added all of the information that you had last week. And so the asset options and criteria matrix, the new one that has the information is in your pile of stuff, called Asset Options and Criteria Mix, and we're on page 3 at the bottom. So you have 6 options that you had talked about before here.
There's one more on the next page, too. There's a 7.
Oh, thank you. 7. So one was to use the land for a parking lot and land bank for the future, move Parks and Rec functions to Crane Park, possibly with the rebuild of the Head Start building, sell or lease. You could request proposals for its use, discuss with the wine train regarding a small hotel or train-oriented development. You could leave it as an option for affordable housing. You could retain for short-term office use with rental income as available, use as a site for new city hall, or rehab both facilities for short-term city use. So what we did last couple of times, it made sure that everybody had the opportunity to weigh in. So let's do that first and then discussion. Who's ready to go?
I'd like to start on this this property. I thought about it a few different ways, and a lot of different ways make sense to use the property. And I'd had a conversation with Mark Presswich, asking him, how many city employees do we have, and then how many of them actually live here in town? And the answer is something in the magnitude of, we have about 80 city employees, and about 10% or so, maybe 10 of them, live here in town. And some of them, of course, don't live here by choice because they'd rather live somewhere else and come into work. But I would argue that if we provided housing for city employees, and whether that's police officers, fire department, people that work administratively within the city, and had a housing complex over there where we had a mix of studios or 2 bedrooms or 3 bedrooms, depending upon the size of the family that was in there, we could have some type of arrangement where a city employee could buy into their unit and then have some type of offset in their pay so that the city could use an asset we have, build a product that's attractive to attract more workers to come here that would be long-term workers, which saves us money, and attract more people to be part of this community. I mean, I think one of the greatest dangers we have is our dwindling population and the fact that most of the people that are here are not coming here to start families with kids, are not coming here to be able to have a job that makes, 70, 80, 100, 150 grand and being able to buy a house. Those things just don't work in this town. So I think it's incumbent upon us to look at what we have, this piece of real estate in particular, and say, hey, why don't we do something here that allows us to help retain employees, help make it more attractive for them to be here, give them a rate that they could afford to pay, allow them some appreciation, some portion of the appreciation as prices go up and they stay longer, allow them to bring their kids here and raise their kids here, and have softball or have baseball teams that are more complete, have schools that don't have diminishing enrollment. And here we have just such a property. So I know we have some things on here that don't include that, but I think we should have it as housing for city employees.
I'd like to go next. It was my understanding that we were to choose from the items that we already had, and that's a brand new item. If we're changing the rules of the game, then we need to know that so that we can all be inventive. But it's my understanding we're to choose from these. And if I were to choose, I would choose leave as an option for affordable housing as number 1. And I would choose, where's the hotel?
I think it's probably number 3, sell or lease.
Yes, I would choose number 3 as my second choice.
Stan?
I think that a first phase would be to renovate the properties for interim city office use presumably during construction of the city hall. I think it's number 7.
Okay. So that's
Even
that's your whole thought for the property?
Beg your pardon?
That's your whole thoughts for the property is just over the next 2 or 3 years, the short-term use for temporary city employees?
I think so. I've thought about one of those locations for a possible footprint for a police department, too.
Okay. That's not on there. Okay.
Well, after listening to Pat and changing my mind, although I do for number 1, I like number 7 for rehabbing both facilities for short-term only use for the city if they happen to have to move somewhere while City Hall is being built either on Main Street or on Adams Street, or retained or leave as an option for affordable housing, or sell or lease to the hotel or anybody else that would like to lease it. I don't want to say one person at all. That's me.
Anna, you can jump in. You want me to?
Yeah, no, I can jump in because it's the same. I mean, I think that the affordable housing is such a need that it has to be high on the list, and I don't see why we can't. I guess just even by discussion today, if there's some way to put it in the report that we talked about city employees, if there's some way to include that, I'd be open to that. But just leave it as it is in terms of leave as an option for affordable housing. Maybe. And then, of course, sell or lease would be my second. And if it's going to be used for short term for the city, definitely rehab as needed.
I would say number 3, particularly the wine train option, seems like the only real likely buyer, as opposed to putting out an RFP and see who else wants that little swath of land next to the train tracks. That doesn't make much sense. But if the train company wants to do it, it seems that you could also negotiate in to the deal number 7 so that they wouldn't take ownership until the city was ready to move out of that facility and come in, but they might guarantee financing in the deal, so it would be the same thing. We'll put the money up, we'll buy this from you, and the day you guys are ready to move into the city hall, then we'll take over that property and do that. So it seems to me that that could be the same one. And I'm always a little bit confused, and maybe somebody can clarify for me, maybe Mark can do it, about the affordable housing requirements that the city is still in need of legally, and where we are on workforce housing, just so that we're defining what we're talking about in the same way for that property. I think what Jeff was talking about is maybe a different thing than affordable, but workforce as opposed to affordable. And affordable, maybe we need more, or maybe we don't. I'm not quite clear on where the city stands on that issue.
I would have to refer back to a document that went to the council recently, but I think in a nutshell, we have milestones that we need to hit each year, and due to a settlement agreement and also other goals. And I think we may need one very low income and then another low income, and those have definitions as a percentage of median income. So we're on target to meet those through existing projects. But it's relatively close, and from a timetable standpoint, it does take time to build these projects. So anything we're talking about now probably won't be relevant for those milestones. But there's also a housing, essentially, working group of the council that's working on a housing initiative. And next Tuesday night, we're going to talk a little bit about where we are with the status of that effort, and we're starting with a white paper that will eventually be published, I think, in a couple of weeks. But I can research the data on the affordable units that we need, the timetable, and then have Cindy forward that data to the committee.
Thanks.
Well, I'll go next because that was a perfect segue for me. I was going to state that I think it's a little premature for us to get specific about proposing housing on given sites, given that there are ongoing efforts in the city to look at this holistically. We've identified this as a potential site, the courtyard. People have talked about turning Scout Hall into possible fire housing and so on. So I think we've generated some possibilities, but for us to push forward with specifics, it seems like it would make more sense for us to integrate with some of the ongoing work to look at housing in the city rather than kind of getting out ahead of them. And but the idea of sort of acknowledging that it is a potential site is a good idea, and we'll see how the kind of the holistic view comes down on the best places to do that. Back to this site, I like the idea in the short term of doing the necessary repairs. Let's take a look at what we do with City Hall. We may need this site as temporary space for them before moving on. But longer term, I prefer the idea of looking for a lessee for it, and I agree the wine train is the obvious choice here. I think they'd be a potentially good revenue-generating tenant in there if they're interested in it, and it seems to make sense. Don't know who else might be interested, but I think we should take a run at that. If that doesn't work out, then we'd have to look at some other uses for the site.
You look pretty excited there, Oliver. I'll let you go. I don't care. Yeah, I think that ultimately, I mean, based on what we've talked about with City Hall and the options that may happen with City Hall and where things might move to, I think that the Railroad Avenue properties become excess properties to the city. So I would suggest that my first idea and priority would be that we would either sell it or lease it. I think we've heard from Cosmot that maybe it's not the most attractive site in the world, so leasing it to somebody who's going to significantly develop it might not, be as interested in leasing it, and you may get a better buck for it if you sell it. And it also may help finance, selling it would help finance, although leasing would too, would give you a borrowing base. But I think maybe you can just sort of tie those two together. I mean, the city council can look at selling or leasing it. You may end up getting some housing out of it if the hotel sort of, works on that whole area over there. So that may deal with the housing issue. But as far as number 4 goes and leaving an option for affordable housing or, company town housing, I guess, which I would sort of say is Jeff's idea, I think that's a policy issue for the city council to take on. And as Tim said, there's a whole lot of other areas in play there with housing and a lot of different things that the city really has to deal with. So I would suggest we, clean it up and it can be used short term for city employees as their place to work, and then really ultimately you'd be selling or leasing it and getting the revenue off of it.
I've driven by that, like most of you, many times, and every time I drive by it, it gets junkier and junkier looking. It's got a lot of power poles. It's got the railroad right behind it. I don't know if I would want to live there, but it seems to be kind of quasi-commercial, industrial to me. And I totally agree with Jeff's sentiments that it's nice to have families and bring people here and raising stuff. I'm just not sure if that's the right location. The problem we're having is we're all assuming that the railroad has interest in this property. From what I understand is that they've already secured other property. They have other ideas for hotels. So to think that they're going to give us $3 million for this, I think we need to really find out before we keep speculating on that. 2 is that unless we really know what we're going to do with Lyman Park and the City Hall site, that's why I picked number 1. We really might need that as the parking option to make whatever goes. Because parking is an integral, essential function of anything we do with City Hall or a cultural center. The parking argument is going to be that we're either going to have to go underground or we might need railroad for excess parking. And so I hate to start chopping it up, giving it up, leasing it, until we've resolved this riddle, which is what are we going to do with the City Hall site? Because they're so close together that to walk from Railroad to the Lyman Park City Hall site is the same distance as walking from Hunt to Steve's Hardware. It's 60 seconds. I've walked it back and forth. It's an easy walk. And so we have no other parking choices. The thing is you can't move parking lots around, but you can move potential housing sites around. You can't move Lyman Park around. It's there. So you have to really stick to what the constraints really are as far as location. And that's a critical location. And I know it's kind of junky and maybe we can use the money, but I think we got to resolve these fundamental goals for us as far as City Hall, Cultural Center, Lyman Park. So my goal is to kind of just don't touch it until we've got that thing resolved.
Do you want to discuss amongst yourselves, or you want to do public comment?
If everybody's had what they want to say in the first round, we can go to public comment. So it's the Railroad Avenue properties are open for public comment if anybody wishes to come to the mic.
Good evening. I'm Mary Stevenson, and I'm on the board of Our Town St. Helena. And first, I do want to say that I really admire the work that you guys are doing. I think the process is really good. I think it's important work, and I think that the time you're devoting to it is well spent. So thank you for doing that. A couple of things that I wanted to say, and this is kind of a housing data thing, but affordable housing in St. Helena is for people who are making from $25,000 to $180,000. Those that if you're making $180,000, you can't afford to buy a house in St. Helena. So when we say affordable, we're not just talking about low-income families. We're talking about, as you say, city workers, nurses, doctors even. We can't get GP doctors here because they can't afford to live here. So I think that any property that you have in your options here, if there is an option to put any kind of housing on it, I would encourage you to include that in your options, because you're not putting that in stone. But the need for housing is so significant now that we could not add incremental economic drivers like wineries or culture centers or anything like that without adding some housing to accommodate the people that are there, the incremental people that would be coming in. And secondly, I think that it's important to realize that you don't have to build just low-income housing. You can do multi-use development on any of these pieces of properties that could include a wide variety of housing. Employee housing, low-income housing, senior housing is going to be a huge need in our town. And that can be developed with retail. You can easily do retail with housing above it. You can do retail on a court with housing beside it. So I think when you talk about affordable housing as a line item, I would like to see you expand the opportunities there. And in any site that has those opportunities, and you've identified 3 so far that I see, Adams Street, the railroad site, as well as the corporate yard, I would encourage you to keep housing in the top 3, because it doesn't have to be just housing. And we can do beautiful housing on any site, including railroad site. So that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, guys, just as an aside, I saw nothing about bowling in all your papers. But I agree with Oliver and some of you that housing is a very necessary thing in this city. And the sites that are mentioned seem like good ones, but I do think also, as mentioned, that we need to coordinate with the city and talk to Mark about what their plans are for the city as far as housing is concerned. I do think that the site for the teen center and the CDF building would be Doug's idea for a good idea about the train, and we should investigate this and see what happens there, whether they would be interested. But it seems like a good idea. I have a few more thoughts, but I haven't quite put it in words yet, so I'll be back. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Anna Vero. Why do I always have to follow Esther? Humble. So just a couple of comments. So I think it's great to keep housing in as many sites as possible. Also just, RENA, I think we're talking about RENA as if there's a requirement to build, and it doesn't mean we don't want to build, and I think we should be looking at all kinds of unique mixed uses and commercial and so on and so forth. There's a lot of spaces downtown, the courtyard. I mean, absolutely keep it at the forefront. But I do want to congratulate the city. I mean, we always talk about what we do wrong, what we don't do right, but this RENA cycle, the Regional Housing Needs Assessment is done by experts, and they look at all 101 Bay Area cities. They look at transportation, job growth, where Apple is, where Facebook is, where you have BOT stations and transportation. And then they project growth and what were an appropriate growth for housing and which types of housing belong in each of these cities. And that was done for this next cycle, and we got 31. And the 31 is divided among very low, low, et cetera, et cetera. We already have met RENA in the sense that we have all of those opportunity sites and many, many more open for possible development. So that's really what the RENA requirement is. But I want to congratulate the city because we're actually meeting the RENA numbers in terms of building, and not that many cities do that. And we're only in year 3 of this cycle. So I think the city should be congratulated. It's very expensive to do this. And in terms of that site, the railroad site, if it's worth $2 or $3 million, if it is, that money would be revenue into the city. And then that money could be put, the $750,000 that the Calderon, if those that one unit cannot be built on time, put into our own housing trust fund. The fees we pay are to ourselves for our own housing trust fund. That's the way that agreement works. So we're actually paying ourselves to keep it in our housing trust fund for future use. And then we still have the extra revenue for the city. Because Brinkle Court, which is a wonderful project, was $1 million piece of land handed over, taxpayer land. And then it's been about a $1.5 million, assistance for that one project of, I believe, 8 units. So just keeping in mind that, fiscal responsibility is something everybody's been talking about here. And we definitely want to keep housing opportunity sites open and be creative with them. And I think more downtown is great on all the sites. But just recognize that there are enormous costs with any one of these. So thank you. And to congratulate the city for all the excellent work that I think it's done in the past few years.
Thank you.
Didn't realize you were that much taller than I am. And I always seem to follow Ann. Vicki Bradshaw, and I'm a resident of St. Helena. And the only thing I wanted to comment on, while I think it's good to have workforce housing for city employees, there are significant legal issues involving offsetting salaries for housing, which would need to be taken into consideration. And whenever you have an affordable housing project, you limit the amount of appreciation they can exercise in order to when they ultimately sell the project. And the other thing I would like to ask is to make sure, as you're considering affordable housing, which we all want, is that it be spread throughout the city and not concentrated in the 98.2% where it currently is concentrated. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to just make one more comment. It is true that we are going to meet the RENA numbers to build 31 units over 8 years in St. Helena, but that does not take into consideration the amount of housing that's been lost in St. Helena through the building of Los Alcobas Hotel and a number of houses that have been scraped and made into second homes. We have 2 jobs. We have 2 jobs for every worker in St. Helena. More than half of our employee base is commuting into town. We're losing the middle class. Our school population has gone down significantly because it can't afford to live here. So I don't congratulate us as a community for what we've done in housing, because we're building 16 units in the last 8 years. And before that, the 6 low-income units that we built, only 2 of them are being rented. The others are vacant because at the owner's discretion. So making RENA numbers, which we didn't make in the last one, we had to make 141 and we made something like 50% of those, is not an indication of the housing needs of St. Helena. Yeah. So that's my opinion, but I can back that up with facts if necessary. Thank you.
Fine. Thank you.
I'd just like to make one other comment, and that is I've heard from 2 other...
I'm going to...
Oh, I'm
if
sorry.
there's no other public comment, I'm going to go ahead and close public comment on the Railroad Avenue property. And then, Pat, go ahead.
I've heard from 2 different people, I think they're related, that there are all kinds of housing sites around the city, and I truly, truly would like you to send me those, because I'd be really interested in seeing them, because it's something that I've been interested in for a long time, and I would have to disagree with you.
I guess, obviously, housing is a big issue. It's been a big issue for a really long time. It's just not something we're tackling here. If you go back to the resolution, it says we're supposed to identify alternatives to address the deficiencies and opportunities identified in the FCNA report, and the challenges of long-range financial forecast, and then the feasibility of I'm paraphrasing, on Adam Street, library expansion, city buildings, amphitheater, community center. So, I mean, it's a much, much bigger issue than what we're dealing with here, and I certainly agree wholeheartedly with it. I know a lot of kids that can't live in this town because it's unaffordable, but it's something the city's going to have to tackle in a much bigger way. And I think Mark did allude to a white paper that's being produced, and so I think there is a lot of discussion at the city council level. So I would just preface that us solving the affordable housing problem isn't going to happen at the SHAPE committee. So I don't know if anybody has any more comments on what we've heard.
Well, we're not alone. This is a stress point all over the state.
Yeah.
I mean, you go down in the peninsula, it's really at maximum stress for people trying to find housing. I mean, it's part of the modern world. And sometimes I think that we don't really live in a town called St. Helena. We live in a neighborhood called St. Helena in a bigger picture. I mean, imagine Los Angeles with vineyards in between Beverly Hills and Santa Monica and Venice. And we live in Beverly Hills. And we're trying to figure this out for Beverly Hills. And yet the whole Napa Valley is stressed with this problem. Mm-hmm. And we live in this little island with restricted amount of land. So, you know, I've heard about this housing thing for so long, but every time you try to figure out a solution, you know, you run up against so many problems. And one of the biggest problems is never having any money. Because, you know, Mary, there was a time when you could have bought 14 acres on Pope, right, through the town group? 10 acres. Okay, then he got the other 14. And that sold for, what, $3-4 million? Okay, so imagine if you had a small hotel on Adams that was pumping out TOT for the last 10 years, putting parking away for a fund. Then you had that money, you could have bought that land for $3 million. Pardon me?
Mary, if we're going to do public comment.
Well, no, but I know I'm going out of the norms here.
I know.
But I'm raising a point. I'm raising a point here.
Yeah, but you shouldn't address somebody in the audience.
Well, you know, I know this protocol, but it's nice to. I mean, this is a small town. We're talking to each other, you know, openly.
And we also have committee rules that we have to follow. So
that's fine. But I wanted to raise that point.
Too.
Well, I think we're getting a little bit off track here. We're not going to define where housing goes in the city here on the SHAPE committee. I don't think that's within our jurisdiction or within our scope. That's what the city is taking on. But, you know, let's face it, this is an expensive place to live. Every place in California is an expensive place to live. This is just the nature of expensive places to live. I lived in Los Gatos, and I moved up here to find some place that I could afford. So there are places that are a lot worse than this, and that place is outrageous. This is affordable housing to me compared to where I was, because I could not buy a house down there, and I can certainly afford one up here compared to that place.
So what we did last time, if you're ready, is to vote on how many of you would keep any of these options, or to see if there's any of them that drop off. Can we just see if number 2 can drop off, since it's taken care of in the Head Start?
Yep.
Can we? Is that okay? Okay. So how about number 1? Use as a parking lot, land bank. How many folks want that to stay? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. Sell or lease? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Leave as an option for affordable housing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Retain for short-term office use with rental income available. 0, that drops off. Use as a site for new city hall. 0, that drops off. And rehab both facilities for short-term city use. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Unanimous. Okay. 9. All right.
So what goes forward?
1,
3, and 7?
1, 3, 4, and 7, yes.
1, 3, 4, 7, yeah.
Okay. So Adams Street. So the first option is a cultural center. That was the Doug Barr's concept.
I'll just speak to that for 1 second if I can.
Can I jump in first
Sure, of
before we
course.
start on this? I do want to just sort of stress the idea that we're talking concepts and development zones and, facilities, but not design ramifications and, whether and it has to be what we're already talking about here. But, I want to go back, it said library, civic center, community, center. Basically, sort of what we were being guided by with the resolution. I just want to make sure we stay close to that.
So do you mean we're talking about kind of generalities rather than creating a site plan?
Yeah, I
type of
think
thing?
I developed a beautiful map, but I'm not going to keep talking about the map, and I'm going to talk about the things on the map, the concepts on the map,
Okay.
facilities on the map.
Well, I agree with you there. I think this is another one of those things that is, Adams Street's sort of a weird property for us. It wasn't even on our original list of properties to look at, but we were given the guidance that it could come in to the discussion at our discretion, however we like it. So it, of course, has come in and out all the way through this, but we have never, it's never been sort of our scope to define the master plan for Adams Street, and I don't think that's within our jurisdiction or our scope here. Adams Street is far too big of an issue in this city for us to define what to do with it, given how much time we've spent on it, and I don't think we've spent enough time to define that. So I think in terms of generally what we want on there is a good thing to include as part of our work here, but the master plan, I don't think we're there yet, and it's...
Well, if all 10, 11 people on the committee just want to agree to what I propose, it would be fine.
Yeah, I'd like to say a word before Doug does his pitch for his cultural center. I think it's a shame that we wrote down A through J. A lot of that doesn't belong in there, and it's confusing. For instance, F, outside event space, amphitheater, that's a totally different thing than Doug's concept of a cultural center.
Pat, if I can just break in for a second.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I was trying to get to, is we're really talking about, forget the A, B, C's, D's, and I's and all that. We're talking, boxes and concepts, and when it gets to city council, they're going to end up having a visioning session for Adams Street.
And with that in view, I really think we could combine, if we drop the A, B, C, D, E, I think we could combine 1 and 2. It's a concept. Have a big building that you can either use for revenue or you can use it for community events. That's it.
For me, that doesn't work as well as combining one and Mark's. My point in this is not A through J. It is that is the most beautiful, quiet, attractive place in the city that we own. It's big enough to actually do something spectacular on. But it shouldn't be a first priority. A culture campus, a culture center would be a great use for it, and I think we can generate a lot of interest in that. But that said, clearly the first thing we have to do is fix the problems that are the SHAPE Committee's mandate, which is the City Hall. It's going to take 3 years, whether we move it to the library back and forth, the library over there, and rebuild the library on that. Whatever we do with it, it's going to take 3 years to pull that off. And during that 3-year time, and the same if we do the yard, which is the second priority, it seems to me, during that same 3-year period, and other things on ancillary, because the Head Start building, all that. But we can then, during that 3 years, think in terms of what are the big things that could go on Adams, a cultural campus, a cultural center, the things Mark has on his plan. That's one. What else can we put over there? And during this 3 years, let's think about developing that. Let's see what kind of cultural programming we might be able to bring to town. Maybe there's no need for this. Times will change. We'll see how much money we end up spending on the City Hall. So we have some time before we have to pin this down and actually start on that. Even though we want to get things done, we can be working towards that over this next 3-year period while we're solving the real problems in town, which is City Hall, the yard, and then picking off some of the smaller ones.
I'll go next. I think I agree with that. I read... Pat, you sent a document around, and I found that I largely agreed with what you were saying in there as well. I think because this is a little bit outside our scope to define it in a lot of detail, I think we do need some additional study. I don't know if it's a full visioning like we did in 2009, but somebody needs to bear down on this. I think we've got some agreement on community serving aspects of this, whether it's a community center or a cultural center or a plaza or how you define that. I think there is a reasonable amount of consensus that the people in the community want things like that. I talked last week when we were talking about the library. It seems like maybe a way to get started on this without committing to anything too much is to, whatever is done there, the entrance at Library Lane and Adams Street is sort of going to be the entry coming from downtown into the property. And the idea of, as we look at redesigning the library, sort of building that entryway plaza, maybe a coffee clatch or something there, sort of a really nice space there. And then as Doug said, we've got some time here. As we're building the City Hall, we're going to have a little bit of time to sort of flesh out what we want the rest of that property to look like. Somebody can focus in on this big cultural event type of thing and see if the idea even works here. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But the part of this is sort of pacing things out. And we've got a little bit of time for the people in the city to get together and define how we want that thing to look on the ground. But I think we could potentially start with the corner and build something pretty short term that's kind of a cool community space there. Sort of integrate it with the library, make the edge of the library, which is already serving as a community center as it is, maybe redesign the outside of that a little bit so the indoor and outdoor have some relationship with nice windows and patios. If you made it nice enough, you might even be able to rent that space out for revenue generation. But I think you can start slowly, figure it out as we go along, and see how that evolves to serve all of us.
I want to say a word for number 3. Mary Stevenson, when she spoke, was absolutely right. And if you look at any demographic studies of this city, the senior population is growing and growing. This could be housing that's restricted by income, but it could be designed primarily for seniors. And it's an ideal location. It's a walk to the bank, it's a walk to Safeway, it's a walk to the library. And sooner or later, we have to just quit saying there are sites all over town, and we have to pick some and we have to do with it. And I think that there were a lot of people in the focus groups who recognized this, and there were people in the visioning process in 2009 who recognized the need for some kind of housing here. They didn't say senior. I'm just making a pitch for this location for senior housing.
Well, I agree with everything that's said tonight. The cultural center, the community center use somehow, a little bit of senior housing, the multi-use like Mark has decided, and I really feel that after we get all the other major things done, that we can probably have the city council perhaps do another visionary process where people can come in and give their ideas of what they want to see down there on that property. I think it's the last part of our open space. It's the heart, really it is the heart of our city, I feel, which should be used for cultural and local serving and visitor serving area. And so that's what I have.
You know, I helped a friend arrange, I'm going into the weeds just for a second.
I'm watching.
I know.
I got my weed whacker.
Arrange a celebration of the life of his wife who died in February, and she was a very famous, maybe not so much to this city, but all over the rest of the United States, cabaret singer. And when he came to me and said, you know, could you help? I'm going to have about 350 to 400 people. And I went, oh. You know, and I called all over, $7,000, Charles Krug, CIA was at least that much. The only place in town he could afford, because he's a musician too and they don't make a lot of money, and thank God it's there, was the Native Sons Hall. We need a place in the city, as I like the community center aspect, we need a place where people can have the celebration of the life of their loved one. The nonprofits can do fundraisers without giving half of the money from the fundraiser that comes in to the organization that rented them the venue. That's just two things I can think of off the top of my head, but I know there must be many, many more. And I think the city wants that. I think it deserves that. And I think it should be built as soon as we can pass a half-cent sales tax.
Mm-hmm. So I want to make sure that we get to everybody on the committee. So the discussion,
sure.
can you do the discussion later once you've said what you want on this?
I walked it again last night, and I was struck again just by the spectacular beauty. And I want to keep that available for everyone in town. I want to try to be mindful of what's going to bring everybody there and also be able to walk through it. I thought it was very important to be able to walk all the way up to the library and not go around. So I know we're not getting into design, but if there's any way to keep it for everyone in the community, that's important to me. So one works. Senior housing, I can't picture it yet because I don't want it to block off people being able to walk to use the space for everyone, but I'm open to that. And then also 4. My concern with the vision process is I feel like that's been done and that there's not a lot of movement. We keep asking for feedback, and of course I want that, but if there's really things are going to happen with it, not just keep asking and not do things with it. My only comment about that.
I think that Adams Street is our big savings account. It's the big blank check that we have that we can spend the way we want and the way we see fit. I think the danger of having a visioning process on this property is we're trying to say, okay, let's master plan the whole thing and let's make it all work, and and then it goes to a committee and it goes on for another year and it goes on, and then the one from 2009 is by the wayside. And I think the comment in this room was, thank God we didn't build that one. So the way I look at it is we have dirt there, and we need dirt for a new city hall. And I think we need to take a piece of that dirt and put City Hall there. That leaves us the rest of the dirt. Whether it's a hotel or a cultural center or senior housing, we can work into that. But for the immediate needs of what we're trying to do is figure out where City Hall needs to go. I think we leave the library alone, carve off an acre for City Hall, make it beautiful, make it so it's engaging, make it so it doesn't take away from the natural beauty there other than what a building has to do, and then move forward with Adams Street later on when we may need that dirt for something else, whether it's housing or something else, the cultural thing. But I don't think we need to try to figure it all out. I think we just need to say, look, we need a site for City Hall. Let's put it there.
I want to say before I forget, because I just realized it, is that one of the options inadvertently dropped off, which was to leave it alone. So number 7 under this, there should be a number 7 that says leave it alone, because I think that was from the last time, and it got dropped off. I apologize for that, but there should be a number 7 on there. So, who's next?
Dan?
I'll make a couple comments about Adams Street. Right now, generally, I feel that City Hall should stay where it is with substantial changes in the design so that it integrates with Lyman Park. I think that Adams Street should be looked at for being subdivided with a back portion being sold off for a low-rise, hidden luxury hotel.
I don't think that's one of the alternatives that we're talking about.
I know.
Well, we got to stick with the 7 alternatives that we've come up with.
Well, actually, I think it is number 6, because number 6 essentially said you can move the City Hall to Adams Street,
It
but
doesn't say anything about a hotel.
TOT on other acres. That was the option that Oliver brought up, remember, that had,
All right.
right?
Well,
Am I saying that right, Oliver? Okay.
I guess my idea is it's a little bit like number 4. However, I think it would be number 4 consolidated a little bit more on a portion of that parcel with another portion of the parcel being sold. I'm concerned about top-line revenue and generating some TOT and getting some cash in the bank for all this work that we're envisioning, and I think that the back part of that property could be sold to a high-end hotel developer with stipulations that it be screened from view and low-rise, et cetera. But I think that property's large enough that we could do a lot line adjustment or subdivide and sell a piece for some short-term, high amount of revenue, and then ongoing cash flow through TOT, and then save the front half of the property for future community space along the lines of number 4. So I think the property could have 2 uses. Also, in that mix, I recommend a large chunk, perhaps adjacent to the library, for parking, with a electric shuttle to Main Street from a parking lot on Adams Street, next to the library.
Okay.
I think you probably received a conceptual plan I sent out, but the more important part of the plan is really the words at the top that talk about some of the requirements and uses that could be met.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay. Oliver?
Oh, okay. Well, it's hard to comment on this because I feel like if I make suggestions, it's going to impede upon other people's dreams and stuff, and so it's difficult because every one of us has a dream of what to do with Adams, and there's a feeling that it's the heart of St. Helena, and so there's a lot of emotional play into this, and it makes it difficult to construct an argument for Adams because it's the white elephant in the room. I feel like it's been kind of avoided through the SHAPE committee and brought in at the last second because it's highly charged. And so, I mean, 10 years ago, you had a lot of meetings, and you were on the planning to the Adams Street vision, and nothing happened. Zero. I mean, there wasn't any motion to even try to revive it or think about financing it. And this was before the Great Recession or whatever. And so, and to think, why would it even come back to that vision of developing all that property? To me, it just feels like we're setting ourselves up to build another Copia, where there's really no organic growing demand to have built it. It just, we kind of created it because we created a fantasy golden city on the hill, and we're going to have little coffee shops, and all of us are going to be going there in this little plaza. I just think that it sounds great, but, you know, when I think of St. Helena, I think of the optics of Main Street. I mean, and Main Street is really the optic of St. Helena. I mean, if you look at any marketing material, it's Main Street. It's the Goodman building. It's my building. It's the Odd Villas building. This is the historical part. It's not Adams. And if you want to use any other kind of historical reference, the first community center of St. Helena was at Lyman Park. It was called Turnverein Hall. And
So again, this.
okay, I know, but I'm kind of, you know, I'm setting up where I'm going to by trying to like put together kind of a backdrop to explain that for me, Adams is on the other side of the railroad tracks, and it's kind of like you don't want to overdevelop that property because the tracks, where it is, location. My mind is either you're going to spend money on it or make money from it. And my preference would be, because I know when the money comes in, most of the problems of life go away. If you had the money to begin with from TOT in a small hotel, you could have solved all these housing problems. There's so many. We wouldn't have a SHAPE committee if we had a, you know, TOT in the bank. There would be no SHAPE committee. We would have taken care of everything. So that the idea is to take Adams, and then the one place where we could come up with a real future, financial future, so that every generation would have the money to take care of problems as they come up, because things change in time. If we start to develop that, we're like a farmer who's going to eat his seeds instead of planting the seeds. So in my mind, the best solution is, because I've heard so many things about open space, and I get it because I walk my dog there every day to the river, is to find a compromise between a zone of that for revenue and a zone of it for open space, and then call it a day. So I parallel with Stan's plan, not exactly, but this is splitting hairs, because it addresses the open space and addresses the revenue center, and not to burden it with any more, because I don't think a railroad can take any more traffic or any more burden, and I don't think we want to get into a thing where we got to start thinking about all kinds of extensions. There's an EIR that's going to have to come out with whatever we do. So we have to be realistic. Are we going to pass that EIR when we do it? And so my feeling with Adams is we can't keep, and I'm sorry, Tim, we can't keep kicking the can. It's going to be another committee thing. I think we got to get started now and really step up and start talking about this and get serious with it. We've been kicking the can for 10 years, and here we are again. I started to make a presentation to the council about what to do with Adams and Lyman Park 3 years ago. It was published in the Star. People came up to me all the time and said, "Hey, how's it going? What's happening? What's happening?" I go, "Oh, nothing. I gave up. I got beaten up by it." And so here I am again 3 years later, and here you are, Suzanne, 10 years later. I mean, this is becoming like Twilight Zone for me, where the people never quite leave the town, and everywhere they go, they're back where they were. And so I'd like to avoid the Twilight Zone, and I think we really need to kind of maybe extend the SHAPE committee and go for it and then really flush it out with Adams. I mean, Doug and I concur that we both want culture, and we disagree where it's going. And I think Suzanne wants culture because it's the History Museum. And I know Pat wants culture because that means a lot to her. I know everybody here wants culture. And we don't have to trip over what is culture. It's all kinds of things. But it's a matter of working with the constraints of how much money we have, what assets we already have. City Hall doesn't belong on Main Street no more than it does on Rodeo Drive. City Hall is bureaucracy. That can go anywhere. And it's not the kind of City Hall where they have weddings and they have the big golden arch. That's not our City Hall. It's just, as Ann said, it's offices, just people going to work. So that could go anywhere. So we got Main Street, which is an important commercial connecting point to the rest of Main Street that's kind of hurting, going sideways. In my opinion, is to make sure that we shore up all of Main Street, because that's the optics to the world. The world passes by Main Street. They don't pass by Adams Street. And the idea is that we need to concentrate on what we have and keep that shored up and not create a parallel universe that we have no idea if there's a real demand for it, or if we got the dollars really to pay for it, or we got the political world to tax ourselves to pay for it. These are all a bunch of ifs.
So 6, is that still where you're at?
Which one?
6, if you can move it. Can you move it down a little, Cindy?
I'm on the wrong page. 6. Sorry.
Move City Hall to Adams Street, possibly into the library, build a cultural center at the City Hall site, TOT on other acres.
And the rest open space, yeah.
Okay.
So the open space looks like, to the hotel visitors, like it belongs to them, but it really belongs to us.
Okay.
It's the perception. It's all about perception. So much of the problem with this town is everybody has these perceptions of classism and elitism and, rich people coming here. This is all perception. If this can be massaged in a certain way, where we can all live with it, we could come up with a game plan where we can enrich ourselves and not cut off our nose to spite our faces.
So I have a question. So Oliver, you've made a case, and pretty much since the first meeting, that the golden goose for us is to put a hotel on Adams Street. I don't think I've heard you propose a financing source other than that in the entire committee. But you rightly pointed out, getting an EIR through there is going to be a nightmare. We just had 2 meetings last summer with more than 100 people showing up opposed to a hotel there. So the idea of us pushing a hotel there seems like an awfully big hill to climb. We have a lot of other hotel options, which I presume you would be strongly in favor of, to have the city supporting the Vineland Station Hotel more aggressively to try to get that on the ground. The Hall property is probably going to be a much easier challenge to tackle than putting a hotel on this property. Even the HRB proposal on the City Hall site had more support in the room than any of those three proposals on the Adams Street site, but I haven't seen you support any of those other ones to the exception of a hotel only on this site.
Am I allowed to rebut those comments?
I just want to say something real quick. I think that Stan's idea of taking a portion of Adams Street and having something that's hidden that generates revenue that we can get money for today and have money for tomorrow does a lot for our town. I think it's really well thought out, and I think Oliver's has mentioned that he wants to have a hotel there, and he's mentioned that that's a great site for a hotel. But I don't know that I think the scale of the hotel that was proposed at Adams was much bigger than what Stan's talking about here. I don't think we need to have something that grandiose, but I think we can have our cake and eat it too if we do it the right way. Because with money, there would be no shade committee. But this town needs TOT tax, and I think Ted Hall's property is perfect for it. Vineland Station, if Rodney chooses to do something there, great. Another proposal. I think we need more hotels here. I think the challenge we have, though, whether it's a hotel on Adams Street or somewhere else, is that people tend to want to keep St. Helena, but it's eroding before our eyes. We can't keep St. Helena. The demographics are shifting. The people who come here are shifting. Why they come here or don't come here is shifting. And we need to make something compelling. And Doug's Cultural Center or Mecca, whatever, I think would all benefit by having some piece of Adams be a hotel. While we're not here to solve that, I just want to make clear that what was proposed at Adams Street before and what we're talking about now for some TOT dollars to help us kickstart this big project we have in front of us to make our town better, I think is reasonable.
But I'd like to rebut some of the statements you made, because I've noticed that when I go home at night from the Shape Committee, I can't sleep at night. I mean, I have like a half a bottle of wine. I'm just, because I hear a lot of comments that
maybe we should meet somewhere in the vineyard.
I would love to meet you.
We could just.
I mean, I don't know about you, but I get so revved up, and people pat me on the back and always say, "How's it going?" And I go, "Oh, you have an hour? I want to tell you." And so the biggest problem I have is I hear a lot of comments, and then I can't come back and rebut them. And like one of the comments is 100 people came to the firehouse and were mad. Okay. A couple things. One, Jennifer Phillips threw that RFP out to kind of get something going because she was getting nervous about the money. And she realized the council wasn't going to move on it, so she decided to move the council with the RFP. So the cart went before the horse. And so what happened was a couple people came in and they showed these huge projects. And at the first meeting, which was at the Cameo, you had more of the business community in the Cameo. I don't know if you were there. And it was pretty quiet, and people were analyzing what the proposal was. Well, then somehow the alarm was set, and a lot of people were emailed, come to the fire station, they're giving away the heart of St. Helena. The rich people are coming, and they're going to put in a 20,000 square foot spa. And that just woke up the Taliban, and they ran down there, and they were madder than hell. And so to say that 100 people, it's like a vigilante group, or it's like Charleston, Charlottesville. You get all these people, and you think that represents everybody. No, it represents the alarm that gets set in this town. Every time you try to do something, the alarm gets set at the 11th hour, and people show up really mad because they were given the wrong information, or what was proposed was out of place, and it wasn't the right idea, but it was construed as though we were selling the property, and you better get down there and stop selling the property. These hotel people just made a presentation because they were invited to do that, and they spent a lot of time and a lot of money. I was in both of those meetings. I was so embarrassed for these business people to fly out here, spend $50,000 on due diligence, make a presentation, only have mud thrown in their face. I mean, that's just spoke a big message to all the business world out there in St. Helena. So The issue is that part of the SHAPE committee was to realize that we need to have transparency. We need to kind of get this before the public. We need the public involved with workshops so that we can understand maybe that we would come to some conclusion that maybe a hotel would be good. Because I think the government here is looking, the leadership here is looking for a little bit of political cover and support for TOT. And the thing about Adams, which makes it so important strategically, Rodney Friedrich's a great guy. I love him. I play music with him, but he's had that property forever. I don't think it's going to go anywhere. So that hotel has been a big pipe dream. Everybody's been telling me, oh, Rodney's going to build a hotel, so don't worry about TOT. But if you look at Rodney's plan with the TOT, you see that he keeps a lot of that TOT for some time. So let me come back to this. We own Adams. So if you sell part of it, you get the money up front with this immediate cash. When you have immediate cash in the bank, you really are in a better position to get bonds, to do things. You could do things with the cash in your hand. The other thing is it's walking distance to Main Street. The other hotel sites are not walking distance. People who go and spend big dollars to walk in hotels, they're not going to walk 5 blocks in the heat. They'll walk 1 block across Railroad. People are not coming in droves down from Los Escobas. They're not. And so the beauty that makes this property so important is it could help shore up the future of Main Street, which is really important because, I'm sorry, folks, but it's going sideways. The people who are trying to rent the Goodman building across the street came over and asked me for help what to do. Because the phone, as I talked to Jeff, the phone's not ringing. They're not calling Jeff saying, we're looking for spaces on Main Street. So Main Street is going sideways. It really needs I know. I'm a shaggy dog story going on and on. But I heard a lot of assumptions, and I want to be able to address them because it's giving the false impression that nobody wants a hotel. I don't think that's true. I don't think that anybody here really knows what all of St. Helena wants for 2 reasons. 1, we don't know everybody here. 2 is people don't know what they want if they don't really understand what the alternatives are and what the options are. It's the same thing with the library. If you ask the library about moving, they would say no. But if you said there's a really great library around the corner that could be built for you to address all the future needs of every generation, they would say, well, maybe we're interested in it. So I think the whole idea of that I don't think anybody here represents a total consensus of what the town wants. And so what are the other assumptions?
I think it's my turn.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
And I would...
because this is an important thing because we've been waiting since October
we
for
need
this
to make sure all
moment.
the committee members
Can I
get
say-
Well, we only have
Can I
so
say
much
one
data
thing?
on what people want, and we had, the second chance was the city
But
council, and the proponents for the hotel could have shown up, and there were 0 people standing up there. So if they're out there, I would love to see them, because we didn't see them showing up at focus groups clamoring for a hotel on this property. They sure as heck aren't coming into this room and clamoring for it. So if there's a silent majority out there that's too afraid to get off their couch and come in here, I would encourage you to have them get off their couch and come in here, because they're not showing up at any meetings. And the idea that these people that showed up were throwing mud at the poor RFP people. I talked to Nunzio from HRV walking out of there. He said, I am so impressed with the people in this community and how engaged they are and how civil they were to come forward and express their opinion in this meeting. So there was no mud throwing going on in those meetings. You may have been embarrassed, but maybe that's because you wanted the hotel and it wasn't supported by the people in the community. I don't know.
Well, first of all, the people...
So hold on.
And
Suzanne gets to say one quick thing, and then
it's very quick. And I was also at those meetings, and I don't remember them like you remember them, Oliver. I remember everybody, like Tim said, that they listened. It was very polite. They gave their comments on what they wanted and what they didn't want. And I see people walking from down on Harvest Inn and everything to town and back with bags from shopping. So people don't care. If they are walkers, they'll walk. Thank you.
And then there are shuttles.
Okay. So
Well, first of all, one thing is that...
Wait, Mark hasn't had a chance to say what he wants at all.
I know, but it's a rebut. It's like a debate here now.
And then we're going to have public comment, and then we're all going to get to hash it again for the next hour after that. A lot's been said, and I guess I want to comment on a few of those things too. There are a number of sites that you can have TOT revenue. I mean, there's at least 3 other sites. I mean, and you can say what you want to about Rodney, but whatever. If it's not Rodney, maybe it's the next guy. But so I don't understand why the whole TOT thing has to be centered, and there's only one place where you're going to be able to get any TOT, and that's on Adams Street. Because there's at least 3 other sites that are extremely viable, and people are discussing it. The other thing is whoever said that the additional revenue for town had to be TOT? Yeah. We've got all kinds of revenue concepts. Now, your opinion may be, or some other people's opinions may be, that nobody's going to vote for those things because they don't want to tax themselves, whether it's a half-cent sales tax, or it's property tax, or a parcel tax, or an increase in changing the way business fees are calculated. I don't know, God forsaken, heaven forbid, a payroll tax, where you exempt certain number of employees or something. I mean, there are so many ways to create revenue beyond TOT. So it's not all about TOT. I think the concept has to be, depending on how everything gets put together, if we need money, here's all these options for TOT. I think going back to 2009 and even back a few years ago, I don't think we had the same political will. I think we have a different city council. I think the city council, Mary and Paul and the city council came together and said, we need a shape committee. We want these things tackled. So I think the city council is ready, and if we do something on Adams Street, I don't think it's just going to sit. I also believe that I worry, yes, you're going to have to phase in the spending, but City Hall, I mean, we need to tell City Council that they need to tackle Adams Street as well. Whatever we end up suggesting as alternatives for Adams Street, it can't be, well, let's do these other things and then we'll talk about Adams Street. Because then what will end up happening is Adams Street won't get done. We'll fix a few things and we'll maybe build a city hall. I don't know. Maybe it'll be a cultural center. I mean, who knows? But if we don't push and we don't encourage City Council to tackle the whole dang thing and, yes, put a plan together, then Adams Street won't ever happen. I did a lot of work on this before I sent my own proposal and put my whole little, architectural drawing and whatnot and drafting thing together. You're suggesting that, nobody knows what the people in town want. I agree. We all have our opinions. That's exactly what we have. But at the same time, maybe you've talked to a lot of people. Everybody I've talked to, there's not a soul that wants a hotel on Adams Street, because Adams Street was bought 18 years ago for the community. And the City Council has even told us to look at it for community uses. They haven't told us to at all even consider a hotel on that property. They're talking about community facilities, City Hall, civic centers, cultural stuff, the things. Culture is one of the mission items of the City Council, is to bring more culture here. And Andy was here last week and handed out the Economic Outlook Study Group and said that, read that, and it's all about, and pretty much he was trying to promote, I think, a hotel in TOT. But he really missed it, and I was on the committee. And what really we were stressing was this number 4 on page 1, and it was potential new business and other industries. We needed to have something that had a low impact on the local infrastructure and lifestyle. And we also wanted, and beyond that, it talks about preservation of existing physical and community assets. And then in the recommendations, number 5 was explore the possibility of promoting a new industry, health, wellness, culinary. We weren't even thinking about St. Helena becoming the cultural center of the Napa Valley. So, there's a lot there. And I think people overwhelmingly in town want Adams Street to be something for all of us. And if you put a hotel on there, and I'm sorry, if you put housing on there of any sort, it kind of becomes their property. They're the ones that are going to be using it. They're the ones that are going to be leaving their houses. They're going to be using it a whole lot. The hotel people will be coming over there. It won't really be for the entire community. So specifically, I think Doug's number 1 and my number 4 are very similar. I think the ideas are on Adams Street. There's an area there for community center. I think you give a spot for the historical society. I think I think if you do allow some retail on that property, 1/3 to 1/2 of an acre, that you can probably sell it for a couple $1,000,000. That'll help fund some of what you're doing. We're talking about lots of open space. We want to be able to go to that park, that plaza area, see friends, meet and congregate. I know you think that I'm out of my mind thinking that we're all actually going to go there, but I believe people really do want to meet and have a gathering place. I read gathering places and outdoor, community spots in everything I read from feedback from people in town. And if you put anything on the north side, a hotel, Stan's idea that he just came up with today, you're going to block the entire view up valley to Mount St. Helena. I mean, that would just be going completely against everything anybody said. So, and as far as the community center aspects go, I think that, one of our alternatives for the library was to maybe, use some of that and rejigger some of it for community, center uses. I think it's great that we have Native Sons Hall. I think we should be using Native Sons Hall, and if we have a place where you can rent Native Sons Hall, I hope we wouldn't go out and build another civic center and then now have duplicated, properties around town. I think you're right. I don't know that we want to do another visioning session, but I think when it goes to City Council, they're going to have a lot of discussion on Adams Street. And so, anyway, that's my 2 cents.
You've forgotten that when you rent the Native Sons Hall, it's $1,000. That's what I'm getting at. I'm getting at the city owning a community center that the people of the city, for various reasons, and certainly for fundraising, can rent for only the cost of maintaining it, and that's not $1,000.
I think we're missing the point of the cultural center as being something that costs the city but gives nothing to the city. Besides the culture and the events that would take place there, they're not going to be every day all year long. It's going to be a building in which theoretically there would be room for almost anything else during the period when it's not being used for those events. That's why I call it a cultural community center. Yeah, well, except that it would be a space specifically designed for big events, but then you can use it for other things too. But there's room for leasing and rental, but don't forget that if you're bringing in these cultural events, I talked to somebody from Camden, Maine today who is the president of the Camden Conference, it generates enormous income for that city in TOT, in the hotels, in sales tax, and in restaurants, and in Main Street use as well. So a cultural center isn't a drain for the city. It's unlike TOT, which gives the city nothing but money and detracts from the quality of life. This adds to the quality of life and generates income and helps Main Street. It does all of those things, and the bigger the scale you're working on, the better it is for all of those things. And just to finish up on this, the guy from Camden said that 20% of the people who come to that conference are the students in that town, and they have nothing but outreach for the students. They even give a $200 stipend to the school teachers in the vicinity to develop a class on the subject they're going to talk about the next year, so that the experts questioning the next panel that's coming up in the next few months will be the kids from the high schools. And the same thing with the dance group that I talked to in New York. They bring dancers in from the high schools to dance with the dancers during the rehearsal periods. The idea is that it'd be good for everybody and generate money, that it's not a drain, it's an addition to.
So I'm wondering if we can do
into that town is, are you stuck in freeway traffic for?
In Camden? Camden's a little fishing town on the Maine coast.
So they don't have big freeways going in there?
No, and they have no big airports. They have no anything that we have. We have all the right stuff here. They have none of it, and it's still they get 1,000 people that come to this for a 3-day conference, and it costs $300,000, and they generate profit every year. Besides the sales tax and everything else that happens, Aspen's $114 million budget a year, so it's a different level. But none of these places are a drain, but they're a boon. Whereas TOT is all dependent upon the guy who built the hotel. Is it well designed? Is it well marketed? Is it any good? Is it going to be sold immediately like Las Alcobas? So you have no control over that. You have total control over a cultural center that's meant to be on a world
Can we
stage.
go to
But anyway,
public
back
comment?
to the center.
Yeah.
Can we go to public comment, and then you
We'll
can
have an
continue
opportunity
your
to come back. So
discussion?
let's open it to public comment about the Adams Street property.
Hi again, Anne. The most energy in the room was clearly the Adams Street property, so I think people care. Let's see. In terms of the history of the Adams Street property, it wasn't one meeting. People have shown up for many, many years. I still have my old paperwork from 2008 and 2009 and 2010, and the mail-in survey where 600 people responded, and only 6% said that they wanted commercial use on Adams Street. So throughout the last decade, there's been a consistent position that hotels were not the favored thing from the public. So I don't think it was just one meeting. And I don't think participants in public meetings are actually the Taliban. We do have arguments here and there, but I'm not sure that's the right term. In terms of the library, I completely agree with Pat in terms of trying to use the library for some revenue. It's a beautiful building in part because it's on a beautiful...
I never said that.
Oh, I thought that you
never said revenue.
Oh, I thought you did.
No, you did, but I didn't.
Okay, my mistake. So that I thought you did in your write-up, in your comments. Yeah, okay, no. And so I think the library is a gorgeous building, and I think it could be used for some revenue to rent at nighttime for people, for activities, for celebration of life, for other things when the library is not open. When I lived in Houston, the museums were starting to flounder. They didn't have enough people coming to pay the bills, and so they opened up the museums. Someone had the idea of opening up the museums at night and off times, and they rented them to corporations for a party or for a business meeting or for other community uses. And they did exceptionally well. It didn't impact the museums and the visitors at all. In fact, it basically self-funded the museum, so they were able to continue expanding and bringing in more things to look at and enjoy and experience. So I would say, in terms of the library building, to keep the library there. People seem to love it, and then also use it on its off hours for some kind of generating, both indoor and outdoor. Thank you.
Vicki Bradshaw, I'm a resident of St. Helena, and actually I wasn't going to say anything, but I would say this has been one of the most frustrating meetings I've attended, and I have attended a lot of meetings, primarily because it was the first time I've heard resident involvement related to a terrorist action, and the fact that people who spend time coming to a public meeting are ill-informed. I mean, I attended both those meetings, and you're right, the one at the Cameo was business related. It was much quieter, but there were a lot of people who were very well informed, who showed up at the library, at the firehouse, who took the time to find out what was involved. There were maybe 2 comments that related to something that could possibly be constructed as positive towards a hotel, but there were dozens and dozens, if not more than that, comments against a hotel. We were told at that point that we would have to have additional meetings regarding the possibility of one of the 3 RFP people who replied to it. There were no other meetings. The next thing we knew, it came up to the city council, who was going to award a contract, at which point this entire place was jammed. 20 articulate people made comments as to why that was inappropriate, and the city council backed off it. I hardly call that a terrorist activity, and I would suggest we want more residents actively involved, not fewer.
Thank you.
Well, here I am again. I've been thinking. I agree with all the comments that have been made about the community establishment there. on the Adams property. It just seems that most of the residents that I have talked to want something of the community there and not a hotel. And of course, I went to the fire station meeting also, and I heard all the comments that were opposed to a hotel, especially this elaborate one that was presented. And I just think, as far as the residents in the city are concerned, that a community place there for the city is the main project, that this is what people want, as far as I can tell from all the comments I've heard. So I just think that a hotel there would not be appropriate at this point according to the wants of the city. And as mentioned, there are many avenues to have revenue for the city, and they can be explored. Why not? You're exploring many other things. Explore this. And I think Doug's proposition for a cultural center being able to provide revenue for the city is a very fine idea and something that should be presented and produced. Anyway, these are my thoughts. I'll think of something else and I'll come up and nag you about it again. So thank you all. You're just doing a wonderful job, and I really appreciate all your efforts. You're just great guys. Thank you so much again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Esther.
Mary Stevenson, local housing terrorist. And I would like to say that this is a 5.6 acre piece of property, I think. And so I don't think it has to be an either-or situation. And I am opposed to putting a hotel on there too, but that's my personal opinion. But I think that my reaction to this conversation tonight is that everyone's getting too structural and this should be conceptual. It's a culture center, community center, some form of revenue-making proposition, and of course I'll put in housing there too. And it seems like that should be the recommendation, and then figuring all that, how that should work is not up to this committee. It's to say this is the best use of this property given what we need. Yep. And I'm also seeing a real, and I think Mark probably planned it all this way, but this committee is looking at facilities. There's another committee, another group that's looking at housing, and there's a group that's looking at economic development. And it seems that those three things need to come together before any of these decisions to make, and that this committee shouldn't have to say, we want this and only this. You should say these are the things that are potential on this property, and then put that into the hopper with the rest of them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Peter Scott. Well, I love the passion, by the way. You guys are really... There was a time when I thought, man, I wish I would have gotten on that shape committee, but kind of like being on this side of the microphone. And Oliver, I'd be drinking a hell of a lot more than a half a bottle. Yeah. I think you guys are hitting on all the right notes. I mean, you're doing so many good ideas, and it's Adams Street, of course, is the white elephant. Everybody's got an opinion. If there's one thing you can recommend to the council, is they come up with some kind of platform or mechanism with a beginning and an end for public input. I'm not talking about people necessarily come up with a microphone and spewing their ideas like mine for a wine water world there where you can have kids and smash grapes. So there'll be a lot of good ones and a lot of bad ones like that. But everybody needs to vent their ideas on this, and the city should let the public do that in one form or another, because each one of you has ideas, and all of us do as well. And what you've actually come up with are the things that I think you should recommend. I don't know, unless everybody here says, yes, we all want a resort on there, we all want City Hall on there, we all want housing on there. I don't think you should make any specific recommendations other than what you just said. It should be used for community, for culture, for revenue. TOT may or may not be included in that. And it should be open space. I've heard those 4 themes throughout here, and I don't know that you need to go into specifics beyond that. I will say that personally, you tend to be talking in extremes: a big hotel, big resort, or nothing. So the public hears that last HRV proposal, or the one from Oliver's group a few years ago, and thinks the whole property is going to be consumed with a resort, or all housing like the 2009 proposal. And I think we can maintain the open space and the community use. I'm sorry, Pat, you were shaking your head at me.
Never happened.
Yeah, there was a proposal that had a lot of housing on it several years ago. At any rate, I think that there can be a mixed use here, but I do think it needs to happen sooner rather than later, because revenue is one of the components. And while I personally don't think we should sell any of this property, I think a lease situation would allow revenue bonds to be secured. But I would say that your recommendation should be more general than specific, if anything. So I'll come back with my plan for it later once I draw it up and get Mark's help on it.
Thanks, Peter.
Thank you.
Any more public comment? I'll close public comment. I just want to throw something out there.
Your microphone.
Oh, thank you. I don't know why. I mean, I hear people from time to time say that Adams Street has to be revenue producing. If it's a community asset, I don't understand why it has to be revenue producing. City Hall isn't revenue producing. The corporate yard isn't revenue producing. I mean, if this is for the community, there's nothing that says it has to be revenue producing. Cities provide all kinds of, I mean, for the most part, I mean, other than some people, at Crane Park, bocce sort of, pays for itself, and tennis, I think, sort of pays for itself. Little League. Crane Park's not revenue producing. Lyman Park's not revenue producing. I mean, I don't understand why there's this sort of foregone conclusion among some folks that Adam Street somewhere along the way has to be revenue producing. I don't quite get that. And the other thing, just to, maybe allay some of the fears of one or two folks that said things, we're not the decision makers. We're going to be given a lot of ideas and concepts and whatnot to City Council, and things could come along to City Council that, City Council could come up with their own ideas. So, nothing's set in stone until City Council signs, a contract with somebody that starts turning over dirt somewhere. So we're just sort of the filters of the ideas, I think. So anyway, there was a couple things I wanted to mention.
I just want to mention that around that time, 2009, the city had a housing committee, and we went to the Planning Commission with, I think it's 5 different proposals. They were all for workforce housing builders. The Planning Commission liked all 5 of them, sent all 5 of them to the City Council. They were for around 32 units. They weren't taking up the entire property, and that City Council refused to hear any of those proposals, and so that died. And then I just want to mention one other thing that may surprise everybody sitting here. First of all, Mark, boy, I don't see anything wrong with making revenue. I don't know how you can put it down. That's all I've heard for the last 5 years here is we've got to have revenue. We've got to have revenue.
But not at Adam Street. There's many other places where you can generate revenue.
There's nothing wrong with making some revenue on Adam Street. That's my opinion. You have yours, I have mine. But here's my other opinion. That is that if we build a building that's a cultural community center building, and the designer of the property designs it in an appropriate way, see if it's successful, if it's actually bringing in revenue, bringing in people. I don't see a thing wrong with a 50-bed hotel on that property. I'm not talking about a resort taking over the whole property. I'm just talking about if Rodney decides not to build his and Ted's is filled up and I see his plan keeping people pretty much on his property because of the way he's designing his hotel. And there's a need for it. I see nothing wrong with a small boutique, if you will, 50-bed hotel on there.
Joshua, we're talking about Adams Street.
Oh, really?
Yeah. More discussion?
Joshua, I don't put you on this thought, but I mean, do you have any thoughts you want to share on Adams Street before we start?
Yeah, I agree with Pat.
Okay.
I didn't hear the first part of what you said, but I think that the town has a lot of things that need a lot of help. Roads, parks, Main Street, housing, and not using a bit of Adams to help create a revenue source, I think would be foolhardy.
Can I just can I add something too? Because you made your comments about that Adams doesn't have to be a revenue center, but that's not the point. I think what it is that in this country, it's very difficult making progress and going forward if we're always kind of pandering to the kind of the mass sentiment. I mean, it was a big decision to do busing, to give women the vote. I mean, and so there could be a lot of people that are emotionally charged about Adams, but there's a lot of people in this town that don't get involved, but really depend upon the staff and the leadership to do the right thing, and that is take care of the whole town. So the problem is we get caught up in our fiefdoms and our sacred cows where we really dig in. This is my Alamo, and I'm not going to give it up. But we have to understand that we own all of this, and we're responsible for all of the things, like what Josh just said, the parks and the roads. And so when I look at this, I look at it as though, okay, we have 3,200 acres of city here, and people, and roads, and sewers, and things like that. And all this stuff has to be taken care of, and it costs money. And we're a small town. We're not a lot of people. And so I get nervous when I hear about Copia 2 being built on Adams, because that's really big speculation. That's big dollars going into something that we don't really have any history or any groundwork, any momentum going into that. So that's a big gamble. And I don't know if this, I am speaking for everybody, but I don't think I personally would want to take on such a big enterprise. That's a little scary to me. And so I think that we can't say that, well, the people doesn't want this, the people doesn't want that. I think oftentimes great ideas have to be sold to people, and they need time to digest it and to understand it. Myself, I wish that I lived in a world where there was no hotels and none of that. I mean, I wish I lived in a world where there was no tourism, But I'm in that world, and this town survives on this world. And so it's a contradiction for me to snub my nose at it. I have to realize, what's the best way to embrace this, and so it's a win-win for everybody? Because I think this town needs some serious dollars, and we can't speculate if Hall or Rodney's going to come around. I mean, with Ted Hall, they could get their rights and then flip it, and then it goes to some other group, and then we go into a recession, and they decide not to build anything, and 10 years goes by, and there's nothing there. Rodney doesn't do anything there. And so we lost the window where maybe we could have sold part of Adams and got this revenue going here for the future, so that when it comes to housing, when it comes to building museums, when it comes to fixing things, there's money coming in instead of taxing ourselves. Because myself, I don't really want to pay any more property tax, transfer tax, payroll tax, sales tax. I'm done with taxes, especially after the Republicans cleaned us out in Washington, where I can't deduct a lot of stuff anymore. I told my family, I said, be prepared for the hit, because that little discretionary income that we're not able to deduct, that's our vacation. That's the little fine point of life. And I don't think it's quite hit everybody in St. Helena how that's going to add up, not taking all those deductions, because we pay a lot of property tax here, we pay a lot of income tax here, and you're only allowed so much of it. And so I don't think telling people we're going to borrow money to build a Copia 2 is going to fly either. Sorry.
Are we ready to vote on the okay.
I just wanted to say that it disturbs me to hear you call Adams Street a Copia 2.
So remember, we're all going to see this differently. We're all seeing it through our own lenses, biases, filters. The job is to put your stuff out there, and then everybody gets to make up their own minds. So are we ready to vote on these options?
Yes.
Can I add one more thing real quick? I don't know why the city wouldn't, and citizens wouldn't want to fight like hell to secure the Hunter Street property, if it's an option. And if selling part of Adams would be a thoroughfare to making that happen, why wouldn't everybody be behind it? It seems like a win-win to me.
Can I just make a comment in clarity? In number 1, I know we're not paying attention to the A through J's, but J was never part of this. Maybe add a City Hall here, too, under that one. I don't know how that ended up there, but it shouldn't be on there. I think you snuck it in the night and did that.
So here's the question before we start voting is you talked about putting some of these together. Do you want to put 1 and 2 together, or do you want to leave them as they are right now and vote on them independently?
It wouldn't be 1 and 2, it would be 1 and 4 if you put them together, because 4 has a cultural center on it. And 2 is about a community center, which I see as a different thing, although they could overlap.
So you want to just leave them as they are, or combine 1 and 4?
I'd like to vote on them separately.
Let's vote on it
Separately? Okay.
But take City Hall off 1.
We're not paying attention to the A through J.
Okay. I just hope the City Council doesn't, too.
Okay. Number 1, Cultural Center. All those that want that to go forward. 3, 4, 5, 6. 6. Okay.
¿Cuántos?
Oh.
No.
Should we wait?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Talk amongst yourselves.
Or take a break.
No.
I meant just
relax.
We're actually pretty far along.
I think it's too bad there isn't a hybrid on here. Why is it all Doug Barr, or all Oliver, or all Mark Smithers? I mean, there's enough room there to do a boutique hotel and a little bit more cultural aspects. Did you already cover that?
They talked about not ignoring the stuff underneath, that these are just broad concepts. That would be
I think everybody agrees there could be multiple uses
Sure.
on that property.
Yeah. And I think when you send this to the City Council, you should eliminate all of those A through J's.
That's what you guys get to decide.
Right.
Yeah, the
It's just
report writing
confusing.
group. The report writing group's going to end up discussing the properties and the alternatives that have moved forward. And
Yeah, but
As long as they make it clear what the intent is of each one of these things, then I think that's...
I think this is a decision to be made by all of us, not the report writing group.
Can we, that's actually the next piece on the agenda, is to talk about how to do the decision-making on the report.
But it makes a difference to me if all this lettuce is going to be on here, how I vote. And I don't see any reason to have it.
it's all concepts going forward. It's looking at the concepts identified, and in library expansion, civic buildings, amphitheater, community center, it's concepts, and City Council is going to figure out what it means to them too, and the report's going to have a little bit of add a little flavor to each of them.
I'm assuming you don't agree.
And we're all going to have plenty of time to read the drafted reports, so we can wordsmith it as much as the report group
Boy, having
allows
11
us to
people
wordsmith it.
wordsmith a report is going to be a real fiasco.
Well, that's the next
Well, we have to
item on
make
the
sure we don't
agenda,
let
is
the-
to talk about how you get from whittling down your recommendations into the report that you're going to bring to the council. But this,
Well, I'd still like to have a vote on taking out the lettuce.
But, Pat, here it's 5.2 is the discussion of the report and how they're going to write it. That's the next.
Yeah, but that doesn't have anything to do with taking out A through J, A through E, A, B. I mean, this was, quite frankly, Roseanne taking notes while we were talking.
actually, we put it all up there and said they were all on flip charts, and you said this was what needed to go forward, and things like City Hall got added, and you said to go forward with it, that this would be the time, or before the report, when you whittled stuff out. But the concepts needed to go forward. So the question is, let's just do that. How many of you want just the bold number 1, 2, 3 with none of the sub things underneath each one of these ideas? How many of you want that?
For what purposes?
For purposes of going to the next step and saying these are the broad concepts that move forward. We don't want any details in them.
Fine. I think we're trying to let the perfect get in the way of the good, though. If we could just be reasonable about the whole thing, and everybody sort of,
I think it will help define.
This is the same discussion, Mark, that we had last week. And Stan wanted something, and you said, "Can't we just be reasonable about it?" And you're not being reasonable because you're not hearing what I'm saying. And that is that I don't like a lot of this in here. St. Helena could become the cultural capital of the valley, really. Community center with library.
We want it to be.
We want it to be, exactly.
So here's the deal. All I'm asking is if you want all of that stuff, all of it taken out, then you vote yes right now. If not, it stays in, and then we vote on each one of them. Okay? So those of you that want all of those subcategories under the broad bold taken out, raise your hands.
Well, I lost that one.
That's one. Okay, so they stay in, and they stay in as conceptual, not as locked in.
Right,
okay.
Just conceptual.
Great. Number 1, how many of you want that to go forward, the cultural center idea? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay. The community center.
It's the same thing, no?
No, it isn't the same thing. That's what the definitions are about here.
Oh, boy, okay.
And this is using the definitions in Doug's note that he sent out a couple of times, defining those two. So, community center going forward, yes, 1, 2.
That's amazing.
Senior housing going forward, 1. Multi-use going forward, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7. Have City Council do another visioning process, 1, 2, 3. 3. Move City Hall to Adams Street into the library, build a cultural center at the City Hall site, 1, 2, 3. 3?
Put me down for 4, too. Multi-use, that's pretty broad.
Okay, so 4 gets changed from 7 to 8. 6 is 3. Leave it alone. That's number 7. 1.
There you go. Finally. Now we know where you stand.
A quick question: would the senior housing? Would anybody have any objection to adding the word housing to number 4? If we're looking at a mixed use thing, does that change anything for anybody, or does it just kind of give the council one more thing to consider?
It does for me.
Okay.
Actually, if you add it, I'd vote for it.
Well, that's. I think it completely changes the concept of what at least I have felt.
Well, Mark, housing is just so much more important than a vegetable garden and a bocce court. It simply
Okay,
is.
how about petanque? Can we have petanque then instead of bocce? I mean, I think the housing issue is a policy issue for City Council, and City Council hasn't asked us to take on housing.
They have a policy that they need to build more housing. It's up to us if we have the opportunity to identify a site for it.
So let me double check something. What you said last time was that the votes would go forward unless you specifically chose to knock something out. So we knocked a couple out in the Railroad Avenue properties, but all of these then will go forward?
I don't remember it that way. I remember last time what we did is we had a revote and a discussion, and only the majority ones went forward. And I remember one of them was specifically it was about the idea of a cultural center on the City Hall property, and we had more discussion. maybe it got massaged, but we actually got a majority of people to vote for that to go forward. So I think we're still at the majority vote goes forward.
Fortunately, it's all on video, but my recollection is that the city council asked that all the options go forward because they wanted to see lots of options.
Well, they are all going to be in the appendix. They just might not be in the body of the report.
Review the tape and do what we agreed to do last week. That's just my recollection.
Well, and this moves us into the next piece, right? Because now you have, and I don't want to make light of this because this has been really hard work. Frustrating. So glad that you didn't have things you could throw at each other at times, but because this is not easy stuff and you see things really differently, which is why you were chosen, actually. So you've now whittled some of this down. You've now got some broad strokes with a little bit of details for concepts here. And now you need to get to a place where you put things together in a way that can go to the city council, right? So there's two options at this point. I mean, there could be more, but I want to offer two. So one is that you do it like you've been doing it as a committee of the whole, which I would imagine, and just my assumption, having been here, is that you will be going way past May doing that. The other option is something that I'd like the city manager to speak to, just to see if might be a easier way to help us move from where we are now into something that you give the city council. So, Mark?
So I'm looking at the original resolution that sort of inspired this part of the conversation tonight, and that is the reference to, additionally, the committee will identify financial strategies along with identifying consequences and trade-offs. So how do we take the concepts that you've identified today and translate the financial strategies? And I think that's the challenge here. So one option, as we just discussed, was a broad group and trying to we have numbers for buildings and maintenance and new construction ideas, but how do you take the concepts that you've identified and translate that to a written report? And there's work there. And so there's work that could be involved in everyone working together on that. And the chair was granted an additional 30 days on behalf of the committee to finish the work by the end of May. And the other concept that we've been talking to the chair about and working with Jean on is the idea that you have 3 people working on writing right now that are assigned to working on the writing. They're beginning the background, etc. And the concept would be to task an additional 3 people with working with the city manager, perhaps the chair as a liaison, perhaps there's a liaison to the drafting committee, the drafting working group. So 3 additional people that would work with us to attempt to identify phasing, maybe starting with City Hall, where if City Hall is a building that the committee has essentially said, we'd like to do something about or recommend something. And from that, probably phases out sequencing of how you invest in other buildings, how you finance the various strategies. So I started sketching out a few ideas. I quickly realized that you end up with a lot of different options at the end if you're trying to take into consideration all of these buildings. And I think by limiting the focus to probably about 4 of them, some of the key parcels like City Hall, the library, Adams Street, maybe the railroad properties, the CDF Teen Center property, that type of working group, working with the staff who can also work in helping to add a little additional capacity to the working group, may be able to use that time during the middle of the week as opposed to waiting till next Wednesday and waiting till Wednesdays to move some of that forward. So the concept would be to potentially take next meeting off. I think there are at least 2 members of the committee that have conflicts next week and aren't available. Jean's not available either. with the idea of coming back on the 16th and perhaps also having an initial early draft of the report writing that's been done to date, sort of the background section available for your review, so that you begin to see what that's starting to shape into. And then all of you would have the product that's produced by this 3-member group that's working on trying to apply some of the financials to ideas that emerge.
Would you, Mark, would you mind, you started out by saying there's been an additional task added to what we're doing to consider the financial component? Is that what you?
No, I'm just reading you the original resolution that describes the council's interest in having the committee identify financial strategies. So we've identified the costs of repair, we've identified the cost of building, we've identified today now a number of ideas. And how you sequence some of that, how you may phase or approach this. If you're starting with City Hall, that may be a good starting point for trying to come up with, I don't want to use the word packages because I don't know that that's the right approach. I think integrated concepts may be another way of thinking about this. But if the big challenges here are probably the 4 parcels that I mentioned, there's been also some discussion of Parks and Rec and perhaps some concept for Crane Park, and that's another relatively big idea that would need funding. But the challenge is, how do you take the concepts that you've identified, and really there's not necessarily a need to do that. You can simply write up the concepts that you have to now, identify a few strategies in general, and that's your report. If you'd like to be more specific, an idea would be to have a group of people working together on that would then share with you a product for review.
And when did that language, was that introduced from the very beginning?
This is the original resolution.
Gotcha.
I'll comment on the 2 approaches, in part because I've been thinking about this as part of the report writing team. We've just started trying to write up the individual sites. And I took the first pass, and I thought I picked a really easy one. I picked the fire station, and I found it really hard, even for one that we've got very few options, and it seems really easy, just to describe the discussions that we had, and all of the nuances of even that simple one was quite difficult. And then I started thinking, well, geez, when we start looking at integrated proposals or whatever you want to call them and describing how all the pieces fit together, it's going to be really complicated. And I thought, well, how are we going to do that? And I kind of had the same little mental debate as you all did, and I thought to myself, if we try to do that as a group here, to lay out the sort of the integrated proposal with the sequencing and talk through all of that, we'll be here till midnight, and we probably still won't finish even one of them. And I think a separate group to do it makes a lot more sense. It doesn't mean that group is defining that this is the one, but if you bring back some proposed plans that all lead maybe with the different options for City Hall, and then let us all poke holes at it, I think we'll get a lot farther along there, and we'll be able to modify something that's already written. It's a lot easier to take a look at somebody's draft report that they've written and tell them what's wrong with it than to write the darn thing from scratch yourself. That's the really hard part. So I think a subgroup putting out the draft ideas that we can all poke holes in would get us there more quickly. And I will volunteer to be the liaison from the report team, because I think we have to have somebody, at least, if not participating, at least watching those deliberations, because they're going to have to be written up into this report, and that's going to be a real challenge to write this up coherently so that the City Council and everybody else can understand what it is we're trying to explain.
I think we're looking for comments on the 2 concepts, whether we sit around and hash it out over a 24-hour period and they feed us and lock the doors, or do we have a group that works on sort of pulling together the alternatives on, I call it the big 4 properties, I guess. And
I think we need another group.
I go for group.
Hashing it out all together es imposible.
Yeah, I think another group.
Group?
Another group to do what?
Okay. and the group would have both Mark and I would be available. I mean, we would both, I mean, I'm going to be away, but I'm electronically around, and Mark's around. But, as you sort of filter through this and try to go through the sort of if-then statement on, City Hall's got 3 or 4 different ideas, and then, Adams Street's got a couple ideas, and, trying to piece it all together and phase them in and whatnot, we would be available.
So is the concept then to have another group understand what the financial, how that blends in with this? Am I missing something?
That group would try to piece together how things would
be paid
flow.
For moving forward, right?
How
So
they
if
would
you say
fund-
it's City Hall, we need $10
Mark
million
didn't want to
bucks.
use the term packages, but you sort of end up with maybe 4 scenarios when you're dealing with those 4 properties, and then how you might, phase them in. And once you have that, then and then we've obviously got certain assumptions that we all have to agree to on costs, filtering it out of the source documents that we've got. And then we would end up layering in financing, which would then come into an answer that says whether you do or don't need any additional financing. And then we'd probably just really give City Council, here's a list of all the different types of additional revenue you can create, but not necessarily picking one over the other.
Is April Mitz going to be involved in this committee?
She can be involved in that.
It seemed logical to me. I'm a little puzzled about what you said, Tim. I didn't imagine that writing up what we decided on each building was going to be that difficult.
Well, there's been a lot of discussion. I didn't think it was going to be...
imagine that all that discussion would come forth in a report. I thought it would be more concise than that.
Well, you have to make judgment calls about what would be relevant to a reader and what wouldn't be. And what gets left out of those discussions, the only way somebody can see that, there are no documents for them to go look at. They're going to have to watch video, and nobody's going to go back and watch the videos of these meetings. They're hard to even sit through, let alone watch a video of. So I found it to be difficult to make a choice. Is that something that we want somebody to know about? Because otherwise it's not.
Can you give me any example?
Just the discussion of how to add the police station into the fire station. So how much do you describe that? Well, we had a whole discussion about is a second floor feasible or not structurally, and you said you wanted it in, and other people said it's not possible. So I'm sitting there staring at my computer like, does City Council want to know the discussion about the second floor of the fire station? I don't know. What do you think? Should that be in the description, or do we just say option A, repair it, option B, stick a police station somewhere in the vicinity?
Well, I think you're talking about trying to get the why in there, right? The City Council wants to know why we ended up making the decision. So as part of that decision, you sort of have to look at what was all the discussion. It sort of helps build that. So I can understand how, yeah.
And that's an easy one. I'm kind of dreading us having to take on all the discussions around City Hall property. I mean, that's going to be hard to describe everything that people talked about, all of the considerations that we went through. I mean, just how much of that can you put in there?
You might need to roll up to a little bit higher consolidation on the detail to get there. You can't restate and report all the details in the weeds that we've covered. You need to have it rolled up to some kind of summary statement.
I agree with you.
For instance, I would have said combine police and fire in a way that works. That got 11 votes. Some of the options might be to build a second floor. I think, or to build. The other option is to build a police department alongside the fire station. I would just say a couple of options might be, but to try to include all the conversation, boy, that's voluminous.
Well, let me be clear. I didn't include all the conversation. I skinnied it down to it's a third of a page. But I found when I was trying to do that, I had to ask myself a lot of questions about does that go in or does it not go in? What's relevant to a reader to understand what we went through and how we came to the choice of those two and why those are good choices, and how much explanation goes with that. That's hard as a writer, even for these easy ones. This is going to be a real challenge when we get to the more complicated ones, I think. That was the point I was trying to make. Not that I think we should overwhelm the reader with all the intricate little details we talked about, but there are a lot of choices to make about what goes in there that's relevant.
I'm sorry. Don't you think when you have two more on your committee, that would be easier because you would be discussing it together?
What's with the two more?
The concept.
Yeah, I think we're kind of getting into the weeds. This will come back. I was trying to make the point that the individual sites are not trivial to explain. When we start to explain the integrated ones, it's going to be even more difficult to explain why these go together and how you pace it and everything. Those are going to be complicated to explain. And so I've given some thought to how we put those together and how we try to present them to City Council or anybody else who's interested in this in a way that they can understand what we did and why we did it.
I think you'll do an excellent job. Sounds like you're putting lots of thought into it.
Almost every one of these, it seems to me, had proponents behind them, and if you just call people up and ask them to boil down their concept to a paragraph and get the important parts in it and discuss it with you before you write it, it might be easier than trying to figure out what people were thinking when they were doing it. So just keep cell phones and call people up and say, okay, we're working on the thing you proposed. Boil it down. What are the things that are really important in making somebody reading this understand what you were saying, and take everything else out?
I have a fear about the financial component and how to rationalize that and put that parallel with the other part of it. If I'm on City Council and you bring me good ideas and we have a City Hall that needs to get rebuilt, where the money comes from and how that comes from is really shouldn't be speculated on our part, whether it's from a TOT tax or an increase in property tax or a sales tax. It should just be like, look, you need a new building, let's go figure out where the money's at. But it's almost like you need to be clear on what your exact need is first and then find the money. I don't think us tasked with trying to tie a financial plan together with a building plan together is going to, we'll be here till August and not get anything done. I mean, it's just...
No, I don't. I don't.
It's in our scope.
I think you're maybe building that up into more than it is. You're gonna put these effectively. There's probably going to be some scenarios, and the scenarios are going to say this is how much cash you need for scenario A, B, C, or D, and from that you can see based on the cash flow and the long-range financial forecast whether or not you got enough borrowing capacity. And then to the extent you don't have enough borrowing capacity, you say, you know what, City Council, you guys got to figure out if you want to. You're going to have to find additional revenue. If you like this scenario here, and that scenario says you're short on your borrowing capacity by $5 million, here's your options for how you can maybe go get more revenue.
So I have a ridiculously complicated financial model built that we can put in any option in there with any timing. It starts with the 6 long-range financial forecast scenarios. It goes out and figures out all the costs, and it figures out how much, what the cash flow looks like. You can then put on top of that sales tax or debt financing or other things, and you can start to play games with the timing and any scenario you want to run through it. So we have a good tool right now that will let us play games with the financing. And it's not to say to go to City Council and say finance it this way, but one of our charges is to identify financing strategies. So we ought to be able to make a few comments about, well, you could finance this with a combination of debt and sales tax done this way, or you could do it this way or that way. I think that's the extent that we'll need to get to.
Seems like there's no harm in giving them some options.
Right? Yeah, I just, but if we were trying to pick the path from the long-range financial goals that they were presented, then we already have the number of what's going to be projected to be in our coffers to be able to spend, right? So if you have something that makes that better, then that's a great tool. I didn't realize that existed. I just didn't want to be stuck here trying to figure out, okay, the building's $10 million, we got 4, now we got to go find 6, and we can get that through doing, they just didn't seem compatible.
We should have another team work on that?
Another team,
Yes.
and Tim said he'll be on it.
Huh?
Are you on the team? Can we
No,
just
no,
see who would be on it?
No, what are you talking about?
The second team.
Option two.
No, the second team,
Mark
Tim's going to
spoke
be
to.
a liaison
Okay, so he needs
to the
three other
team.
people?
I've got
Mark
it.
and I are going to be on the side. They're available and helping, and if answering questions, and if people just if they're struggling to help them get over that struggle. And then what we need, I was going to suggest if we were going with the group, and it sounds like maybe we're going with the group, right? We're not going to try and hash this out in a 24-hour marathon. So I was thinking of Pat, Suzanne, and Joshua being on that group to try and.
I would nominate Tim rather than me. Seems like it's valuable. that he's
Tim's already on
both.
a
I
group.
realize that. He said he's up for it.
What are you
Are
asking?
we- is the
What are you
sec-
suggesting we do?
Is the second
Yes.
group,
What Mark just described earlier about the group,
And I need to know if it has to do with writing or finance.
it has to do with identifying the alternatives and how the alternatives of the big four properties fit together and how they sort of get sequenced and timed as far as phasing them along.
so the second group, you're talking about developing migration plan, a logistical migration plan,
I don't know if
scenarios.
there's a logistical migration plan. I think it's identifying what we had here and what the if-then sort of pathway is for, so for instance, City
That's
Hall,
what
I
a
think
migration
there's.
plan is.
If you'd given us a choice at the beginning, I happen to love to write, and I think I'm a good writer, but you didn't give us a choice. You just assigned it to some people. But I'm not good with finance, and I don't feel competent to do
Okay.
that.
Well, you can say you don't want to be volunteered for it. That's fine, too.
I don't.
Okay.
If the second group is going to be focusing on a logistical, a migration plan.
It's
with
not a migration plan. It's simply looking at the alternatives that we've developed that are going forward and when they may happen. So if you're looking at City Hall, and there's like 4 options for City Hall. There's build City Hall and City Hall property. There is a City Hall in the library. There's a City Hall on Adams Street. It's looking at each of those and then seeing how that then pieces with, is there a cultural center on City Hall? Is there a cultural center on Adams Street? We're leaving a space on Adams Street for the Historical Society. What are we doing with the library? Are we remodeling the library? I mean, it's piecing those things together so you end up with probably 4 or 5 scenarios for the big 4 properties.
I'm still confused, or it seems to be too fuzzy a distinction between the two groups.
Maybe I can help here. This is, in a nutshell, the Excel or spreadsheet team, right? So what we're imagining is you may have 10 fiscal years spread out, and if we're building a city hall, for example, or moving to a different building, there's going to be a design phase. There's going to be a cost to that. We're going to plug those numbers in years 1 and 2. Then there's going to be a construction phase, and then let's say City Hall is built concept. Some of those staff that are over at the Teen Center or at the CDF building, that parcel then becomes available in year 4. How much can that be rented for, leased for, sold for? So we're really building some spreadsheet concepts that would then be shared with the council. So at some point, someone would need to do some thinking regarding how to organize the financial strategy side of the equation here. And I think the council would benefit by having the committee provide some thinking on the concepts related to financial strategies.
Yeah, that's what I mean when I use the term migration plan. It's a logistical flow. It's the Rubik's Cube of how one piece gets dealt with and when that bumps into the next, or how you create space in advance of moving another department or departments into that space so that you can work on A. So it's a migration path that has to have a logical flow to it, and on the flip side, along with that, has the financial component to drive it, or to ride along with it. That's what I mean by a logistical migration plan, or migration scenarios that would be different depending on what alternatives we're addressing.
So are you in?
Pat, you've said you're out. You don't want to be on. And Suzanne's going to do the same thing.
Well, I on the deciding everything except the finance. I am not a financial person. I mean, that would be very difficult for me to try to even.
Does it seem like we're doing an enormous amount of work before the city council narrows this down? Because if we're going to push ahead every one of these that had even a single vote on it, and then figure out the financing, for instance, for senior housing on Adams Street when it had one vote, then we're wasting a lot of time.
I've
Only
suggested,
the majority items went forward.
I think at best, the first time we come back, there might be 4 completely fleshed out, start to finish kind of scenarios. And it's by no means even coming near all the possibilities. But we're going to have to say, okay, let's start with Adams, our City Hall on its current site, rebuild it there. Okay, what else goes with that? It could be dozens of things, but we'll have to sort of pick from the conversations that we had, what were the favorite ones, and create one of those. We just got to create one to get started. And then let's go put City Hall over on Adams Street and create another one like that. The group's going to pick those apart when they come back and say, no, you shouldn't have done that, you shouldn't have done that. But we got to start somewhere with a few that people can look at and say, yeah, that looks pretty good, or no, you guys are out to lunch.
Okay, so you're taking Pat's spot. You said you're up for it. He's
taking my spot.
Huh?
He's taking my spot.
So you're out?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll volunteer for the migration and the financial group.
Okay.
All right.
As long as I get to use that cool word, migration.
Stan, and I need one more. Doug, Oliver, Jeff, who?
I'm out of town all next week if this is going to be happening.
And really, I think the financial is just,
I know. But
it's only if it comes into play that you can't do it in the general fund, and then you'd be just suggesting 1 or 2 of the Cosmont options. It's not really looking at, I don't think that's the biggest part of it.
I know, but it's fine. There's a roadblock, so that's fine. We'll just.
But I think what I want to say here is there's another option that you haven't talked about, and that is that you leave the work where you've done it right now, and you forward these recommendations with the votes. You don't do any packaging.
That's completely against what the resolution says they asked us to do. I'm not going there. I'm sorry, I struggle with that one. I mean, they specifically asked us, they talked about feasibility, and they also talked about financial strategies. So I think we have to deliver them something that and we've got it. We have the ability to do it. So I don't want to drop it short.
Well, can I say something? And that is, for some reason, the financial component just seems incomplete to me, because EMG and Cosmont were talking about replacement value, and we finally got out of EMG that it's not $285 to build per square foot of City Hall. We finally realized it's $600. So there's a little bit of loss of credibility in some of these numbers. So it seems like going forward, there needs to be a little bit of a review of what the assumptions are by which we can bank our opinions or our suggestions on some valid point, which is, what is the cost to build anything civic? Is it $600? We need to all agree and establish that. 2 is, with EMG, they made this comment that the library at 17,000 square feet, that's normal for a town like this size. Well, we challenged them and we've got no response. They can't prove it. They just made this flippant comment and they have no way to prove that. So we can't use that. So I think it's important that we understand, and 2 is, what is the cost of this community center in Adams or this cultural center? I mean, what is that number? What is that? I mean, developing 5.6 acres of land, and so how can you talk about a financial recommendation when you can't even evaluate what is the total cost of these things?
I think it's really important at this point, and I've had this question raised by other members of the committee through the process, but at this point, I think it's exceptionally important that the committee exercises discipline with the numbers that we're using. And the reason I say that, this is order of magnitude planning. So, of course, it's not going to be down to the precise dollar. But your work in reviewing the EMG study bumped that number. And I think we agree that 600 is a better number for planning purposes than 285 was. And so what I would request is that we use the numbers that we've agreed on. In fact, I think it's important that I put together a one-page document that summarizes all of these. So you would have the $600 a square foot, and we used a placeholder. We just made up a number of 20,000 square feet for purposes of planning, really order of magnitude planning, on a community center concept or cultural center concept. And it was based on looking at a couple of other communities and picking a number to work with. And I've been in a 21,000 square foot facility that probably feels like the scale of what this community might be, and what you've kind of talked about. And in terms of repair costs, it's going to be important that we use the numbers that EMG has produced for order of magnitude planning. In fact, I'm going to have our Public Works Director, after this next year, beginning the following year, use the EMG study to sequence and plan out and budget for repairs to these buildings. In fact, we're already getting started. The council last Tuesday said, let's get started and fix the corporation yard. And we're programming additional money that will be under council review at our budget workshop for additional buildings that are identified in the EMG study. And it was so valuable to be able to have them help us prioritize the needed investments. But I think from an order of magnitude planning, we have numbers that we ought to stick with and use. And they'll be validated when we go to bid on projects. They'll be validated when additional planning is done and analysis is done. But for purposes of this committee, I think you have good numbers that you can work with from a planning perspective. And I think it's going to be really important for the writers and for this collective committee to agree that those are the numbers we're all going to stick with and use at this point.
But I just want, for clarity, just to straighten out the record, there was an idea about moving the City Hall into the library. And my idea was to move it in the library and have tenant improvement of about $75 a square foot for 10,000 square feet for the City Hall. Somehow that concept got advanced to like building a second floor, and it went to $3 and $4 million to build that. And then that argument was used to say, well, if we're going to spend that much money, why don't we just build a new City Hall? But I just want for the record to say that you can go into the library and build that out for $75 a square foot. And you would be under $1 million to move City Hall into the library. I just want to establish that point because it's important to know the dynamics of all the possibilities as far as how much money we want to spend and how much money we're willing to spend.
Well, that's your concept that you can do it for 75. But we do have Cosmont that said it would be closer to 4.
Based on 2 floors?
No, they weren't basing it on 2 floors. They were basing it on the fact that you had to make the library's ground floor actually work for City Hall. You can't just have a bunch of big open spaces. I mean, it needs a lot of work. I mean, that's...
I disagree. I think it was built on that was based on the idea of doing the multiple floors for the library. That's where that number came from.
No.
That's why I'm bringing it up for clarity, because...
It wasn't. They just said that's about
okay,
what it would cost.
then you and I disagree, so I think we need to have somebody except you and I determine what is...
Cosmont told us it was $4 million.
Tim has a model. Tim has a model. You can plug all the numbers in.
You could run a scenario in
right?
10 seconds. And
perfect.
Compare it.
Jeff, you want to be on that committee too?
I'm stretched right now. Thank you.
Oliver?
I'm too biased.
Hey, you're honest.
Stan, it looks like we have free reign to do whatever we want.
Yeah.
Might actually be better with
Joshua
2.
out. Okay, we'll make it a 2-person. It's fine.
Hey, Glenn's not here. Let's put him on it too.
Okay. All right. So we'll do the group thing now. But what are we doing with regards to meeting? Are we not meeting then till the 16th? Are we going to try and get 2 meetings in the week of the 14th? I mean, we're getting up against a deadline here. We kind of need to be done by the 25th of May.
So this is the committee that we need feedback from. So we have a couple people that have conflicts next week, can't make it. There may be an advantage of having the writing team continuing on the focus. Tonight we distilled down the remaining buildings, so the writing team is set in motion, knowing what that universe looks like. Meanwhile, the spreadsheet team can get started, and there'll be a liaison with Tim between committees or between working groups. And so there may be an advantage of skipping next week if we need a little bit of time to get there. And is there a problem with jumping to the following Wednesday, which would be the 16th of May? And at that time, the vision for the agenda would be a review of the draft report to date, whatever that looks like, and then a review of what the product is coming out of this spreadsheet group.
Mm-hmm.
And then feedback from the full committee.
I guess
on
my
both
concern
documents.
is, do we have enough meeting space between the 16th, or do we have a meeting on the 14th?
So we did look at calendars, and the 14th during the day works, but we would need to determine a location, and whether that's morning or afternoon would have an impact on that. And it probably won't be here.
Right. I'd feel more comfortable if somehow the week of the 14th we got 2 meetings in to really see where we're at.
When do we turn this in? When's the assignment due?
Well,
the goal is sometime by the end of the month. So you're down to, if we're skipping next week, you're down to the 16th, the 23rd, and the 30th.
Well,
And,
I'm not around
I think
the 30th.
the chair has a
'cause I thought
conflict
this
on
was
the
supposed to be
30th.
done by the 25th. Potentially there's a meeting on the 7th, but right now we're scheduled to go to City Council on the 12th.
Why is it we're not meeting next week? What happened next week?
Well, you can check in next week, and we can have a meeting next week, and we can talk about what the writing looks like to date and what the spreadsheet group comes up with to date, receive some feedback, and then come back the following week and continue that same discussion until we get to a point where you feel comfortable with the document.
But next week we're missing.
You're missing
Dean's
at
out,
least
I'm
2.
out.
I'm out.
Tim's
I'm
out.
out.
Doug's out.
Okay, that's 3 that are out next week.
That's why, and I think the group maybe needs more than 6 days to pull the.
That makes sense, right? Just a lot of information.
That's why we were talking about. Let the
Okay.
writing guys really get
Right.
writing, because now that we've gone through all the properties, they can start plowing ahead, and then the other group, Stan and Tim, can start pulling the other information together.
So I think the next question, if I think I'm hearing that next week everyone's comfortable with skipping next Wednesday, the question is, do you want to meet twice the week of May 14th, which would be the 14th and the 16th, Monday during the day at some point, and Wednesday in the evening here? Or do you feel that you'll have enough time on the 16th and beyond, perhaps a couple meetings the following week? It's a bit of a squeeze.
My concern is we always need more time than less time for even the simplest of tasks.
Is there an end date to this? I mean,
Yeah, hopefully the 23rd of May.
yeah, can we stop on the
report is
23rd?
reviewed and
23rd, 25th, something like that.
I mean,
when you feel comfortable with the report, which we're hoping by the 23rd of May, which is 3 Wednesdays from today, 3rd Wednesday from today, that you're finished. But you may need additional meetings to move through the writing review and move through the spreadsheet analysis, the financial analysis,
Stan?
which essentially gets integrated into the report at some point.
The teams are working offline, right?
Teams are working offline, so there'll be a lot of movement over the next 2 weeks.
I could come to a Monday the 14th daytime meeting and the 16th in the evening.
Myself also.
I think I can too.
I'm in.
I think I can too.
Depends what time Monday, but
I think it was going to be after. Was it going to be well, I guess maybe Cindy can try and put out a Survey Monkey or something. Yeah. But maybe it was going to be in the afternoon, I think. Like
I have one
12 to
conflict
2 or
between 11
12 to
and
3
noon
or something.
But I
12
don't
to 2
know that I
sounds
need
great.
to be there
Okay,
for the entire thing.
maybe we can shoot for Monday from 12 to 2.
12 to 2?
If that's what it takes to close out 23rd, yes.
Is that the 14th?
Well, that's what I'm trying for, Oliver.
Well, no, but, I mean, we've got to vote on it. We got to, go for it.
That's why I want to have
Yeah.
2 meetings the week of the 14th.
14th and it's 16th.
We might have to have 2 meetings the week of the 21st.
Stan, it's up to you to write this.
What are the agendas for these meetings? Are these to review the offline work that's been done to that point?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
Both the writing group and the packaging group.
You mean the migration group?
So,
Ka-ching.
so the next meeting would be conceptually noon on Monday, the 14th, at a site to be determined. Could be the city's, could be here, possibly. Could be the fire department or another location. So we'll need to work on that. Followed by Wednesday evening, the 16th.
All right. Anything else? Meeting adjourned.
Great.